Good evening, folks. I'm Kevin Butler. I'm the Law Director for the City of Lakewood. We're going to get started so that we can get out of here on time. I hope that we're able to break in possibly early tonight. This is expected to go to 8:30. At 8:30, we will formally adjourn. And if any of you would like to stay for any unanswered Q&A, we would be more than happy to stick around up here. What I'd ask at that point is that those of you who want to leave or who must leave quietly, please, and then within a few moments, we'll just start taking additional questions from those of you who stay after 8:30 for Q&A. We're going to do that right from the audience rather than have you come up, and we'll try to get as many questions answered as we can. For those of you who must leave, of course, feel free to leave when the presentations are over. We're joined by 4 presenters tonight. Our 4th is on its way. And I'm going to actually begin just with a couple of housekeeping items and some updates on some city law that may be of some concern or importance to you. I wanted to let you know that for the first time in a long time at our landlord seminars, we have not handed out this printed book, which is called Best Rental Practices. It's a guide that the city has prepared for the benefit of landlords. It was last updated in 2016, and we will continue to update it. The PDF version is, that is the electronic version, is on the city's website. It's linked to a page called, a page that's specifically designed to give you additional resources as landlords in Lakewood. We recognize that with 52% of our housing structures in Lakewood as rental properties, that this is a very important business to our city. And so we try to do the best we can as a city government to arm you with all the information, all the assistance we can give you. Included in this manual are a whole host of tidbits of information and best practices on everything from applicant screening and the way to do that lawfully and well, executing rental agreements and the types of provisions you may want to have. We, in fact, at the appendix to the book, we've included a sample, just a sample Ohio residential lease agreement that generally covers all the bases. We, of course, don't give any legal advice in this book, but we think that it could be of practical use to you. We offer advice on crisis resolution, dealing with the police and tenants and other situations that require the involvement of our police and public safety officials. Dealing with our building and housing division. And of course, we just give you some general information on who to contact in City Hall. I guess my question to you is there information that you have wanted as landlords and perhaps have thought to consult the city for this information that we either are valuably providing you or are not? And so just at the outset tonight, I would ask any of you to raise your hands and let me know now whether or not you could benefit from information that we would produce in a form like this and get to you. Yes, in the back there, sir. To do your own repairs? Okay, so the question was, can the city produce information for the benefit of landlords on whether or not it's appropriate to do certain repairs on your own, or whether you have to hire contractors, or get a permit, Okay. I'm going to turn it over to the planning director, Bryce Sylvester, who also has a role overseeing our Division of Housing and Building, and he might be able to answer that.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Great question. One resource that you could access as of today is the housing page at onelakewood.com. We've tried to create as many one-page documents based on a lot of work that happens in volume in our city. So, for example, templates for if you're thinking about rebuilding a garage or the types of plans that are needed for a bathroom. And we continue to evolve on adding those one-page documents. So that's a resource that you could add today. But if it were helpful as a part of a document and or a regular communication to our landlords, we certainly would be open to creating that.
Yes, let's try first row. So, is this language or cultural? So the question was, does the city offer, tell me if I'm not paraphrasing you correctly, does the city offer any services mediating disputes involving folks who may be from other countries and may struggle to fit in within a neighborhood? Is that a fair question? Okay. Well, what I can tell you is that we have often referred folks, taken in situations that call for mediation, so neighbor-to-neighbor mediation, perhaps tenant-to-tenant mediation in duplexes. And we have referred those out successfully. Either we bring in a mediator, and this is a free service for our residents. It would be the same for landlords. We bring in a mediator or refer out to the Cleveland Mediation Center these types of situations in the hopes that the mediators can help resolve them. We haven't encountered any situations that specifically involve cultural or nationality assimilation, but those would not be exempted from our free mediation program, and that is run through the law department. So you can call the law department at City Hall. Just call City Hall and ask about the mediation program. There was an arm up. Yes.
Kevin, on that point, though, we do have a community relations advisory group of citizens who work to help us address cultural issues. So perhaps if you could check with me, if it's an ongoing issue, we could get you in contact with some citizen leaders.
Fourth row. Yes.
Something else the guidebook might add is if you want to sell your rental property, what steps you might want to take. If you need to have it inspected, when, common things like that.
That's a very helpful suggestion. The suggestion was that the guidebook that I've just shown you and that's online could contain information on what are the best practices around selling your rental property in Lakewood. And that is not something that I believe is covered in this book. I appreciate the good suggestion. We'll certainly keep that in mind for a revision. Yes, second row.
How about a list of recommended and approved contractors? As an example, to find a decent, somebody who can do plaster work.
Yep.
That would be very helpful.
So the question is, can we produce a list of recommended and approved contractors? We can't produce a list of recommended contractors, but we do produce a list of approved registered contractors. And we don't necessarily do that in this more fixed medium, this book, but we do it online because it's constantly being updated. And that's on the city's website. You can use the drop-down list to find any type of contractor, and it'll pull up a list of all the registered contractors in that area. We cannot make referrals or recommendations out of City Hall. That would be unlawful for us to do that. But it's a good suggestion. I appreciate it. Just for everyone's benefit, the list of registered contractors is available on the website. Any other suggestions right now? My last question to you is, do you want to walk away from these seminars with this printed book, or are you okay? By a show of hands, who would want to walk away with the printed book versus just being satisfied with knowing that it's online? All right, you're about half and half. That gives us good information, so I think probably we'll budget to continue to print some. So thanks. I should tell you that on your way out tonight, we have about, 30 or so left of these. We did not order a reprint for this seminar, but we'll do so for the fall. And any of you who would like a hard copy and can get to it first, it's out on the table outside. Back row, yes. So the question was, do we have a program where the city becomes aware of new tenants and therefore is able to mail welcome to Lakewood packets to those new tenants?
That's a great question. Melissa Garrett handles packet. I would say, please call the mayor's office and pass that information on. We'll deliver it to Melissa Garrett, whose extension I can't recall right now, and she could get a packet to your tenants.
We, of course, do have registration. So we have a housing license registration mechanism. You're all part of that because you're here tonight. And I believe, Bryce, we're still taking tenant information for the purposes of passing that on to our Division of Municipal Income Tax, correct?
Correct.
All right, so we are still getting information on tenants. I don't know if we're using that information to send those new tenants our Welcome to Lakewood packets. And so that's a very good suggestion. We'll follow up. Actually, if you want to follow up the mayor's office, we'll make sure to get your tenants hooked up. But let's stop taking Q&A at this point and get into our presentation. Just a couple of additional housekeeping items. Restrooms are outside, out the hallway to the left and then another left. On that Lakewood Landlord page, we also have access to information on our discounted Lakewood-only tenant screening program. So we give you a checkout code that is available at one of these national information clearinghouses. You can use that checkout code to get pretty significant discounts on the cost of doing routine applicant screening if you'd like to use that. So find the Landlord page on the city's website, and you'll see a link there for the tenant discount screening program. Yes. I'm fairly certain it is. I'm not. I guess there might be a little trial and error, but I'm fairly certain it is. It's not just per transaction, right? The code ought to work several times. You have to be a Lakewood landlord to get it, and in order for us to determine that you're a Lakewood landlord, you have to contact the mayor's office, and there's information on that at that link for that purpose. All right. I'm going to give you a quick update on some ordinance changes that have already occurred or are in consideration right now that may, to some extent, impact you. Prior to last year, our Pest Control Law applied to all pests and vermin. Under that law, which is in our housing code, Part 13 of our code, tenants were responsible for any extermination if the infestation, vermin or pests, was confined exclusively to their unit. Landlords would be responsible for extermination if the infestation occurred in multiple units or in the common areas of any rental property. We examine this in light of the bed bug, I guess you could fairly call it a crisis, underway right now, and determined that this particular language was just not workable. We were having a very, very difficult time enforcing it, particularly in light of the fact that bed bugs, by their nature, are very hard to detect and are oftentimes within walls between units, and no one knows it until there becomes some sort of outward manifestation of their presence. So last year, actually the prior year and last year, we worked very hard on this. We assembled a task force on it and brought a new law to City Council, which was adopted after some revision. This behind me is a summary of the new law. Owners of property, that's you, are now exclusively responsible for the extermination of all infestations, whether it's bed bugs, other pests, vermin. Now, I get the question a lot whether or not that means you must be solely financially responsible, or whether you can pass that cost on to your tenants. We make no provision in this law on whether or not you can pass that cost on to your tenants. And so if you do that in your lease agreement, this law does not impact that. You may do that as far as we're concerned. But you are responsible as owners of the property for the work of exterminating, that is to say the contracting for it. We wanted to draw a pretty bright line between who was going to be responsible for that work so that the city had an easier enforcement, I don't want to say easier, but a clearer enforcement mechanism in response to the bed bug crisis. Tenants are responsible for notifying landlords within 72 hours of discovery of any infestation. And so if you have cause to believe that a tenant has violated this rule, it's a violation of a local code. You may have provisions in your leases that obligate tenants to follow all local code, and that would be a violation of local code and therefore your lease agreement. So tenants do have responsibilities. The other responsibilities is that tenants have to give you access to all areas necessary to exterminate the infestation, you or your contractors. That's an obligation. And so tenants who may suffer from some form of being pack rats will have to open up and cannot deny you that access. Very similar to a leaking pipe within a wall. You need access to that area, and you're permitted under our code to get it. For bed bugs only, now those two provisions that I've just read are for all insects and vermin. For bed bugs only, owners are responsible to notify tenants in all the surrounding units within 72 hours of an infestation, all right? So the tenants can be ready to either open their doors and allow an exterminator in or be on the lookout for bed bugs or plant the necessary traps to help control the problem. So contiguous means next to, on either side, across the hall, up and down from that particular unit. I don't know what size properties you all maintain, but that would certainly include all units within a duplex and several units within an apartment building. And also for bed bugs only in 4+ unit buildings, those are the larger buildings in Lakewood, 4 or more, the treatment must be done by a state licensed pesticide applicator, or the treatment must be heat treated if it's not done by a state licensed pesticide applicator. And the heat treatment is, my understanding, is the most expensive form of bed bug eradication, but it also doesn't require the licensure. The same code is in place. It's in 1306-34 of our property maintenance code, and it's enforceable as a housing code violation. We have a current law that's been in place since 2008 that bans pit bulls and pit bull mixes as well as canary dogs from Lakewood. There are some limited exceptions, as you can see here. Veterinarian, dogs cared for by veterinarians and rescue organizations and service dogs and police dogs are accepted from this ban. When a dog is discovered in Lakewood that is believed to be a pit bull, we have an evidentiary hearing before the designee of the Director of Public Safety, happens to be the woman who checked you in tonight, Shannon Strachan, who's an attorney, and the mayor's executive assistant. So she'd be the hearing officer who hear the case, and if the dog is found to be a pit bull based on the testimony of the city, and whether or not the owner showed up to present competing evidence, then the dog would be ordered to be removed from the city under this ban. You probably have heard, if you've been following any Lakewood news, that City Council is now considering an ordinance proposed by the mayor that would repeal the ban and would replace it with some pretty significant restrictions on the keeping of all dogs in Lakewood, as well as possible additional restrictions for pit bulls and pit bull mixes. That new ordinance is still being considered in committee right now and has not been enacted, and we expect that there will be some revision to it before it is enacted. What the final product looks like, we're not sure just yet. But what I can tell you is that we're tracking changes to state code and some local law that we found around the state that we like because it does a very good job, we think, of trying to prevent dangerous dog activity, bites and the like, by identifying dogs earlier on in the process before they've actually bitten someone as pre-nuisance or nuisance dogs, and those would be subject to some additional restrictions. Dogs that are menacing in nature, that growl for no reason at passersby, that appear to be more vicious. And those would still be subject to a hearing, but it would enable the city to put some protections in place to prevent bites. We expect that that mechanism will remain in the law after it's passed. We are also including some additional restrictions for all dogs, like non-retractable leashes, leashes only 6 foot in length or less, so that dogs are more under control as they are being walked. So just bear in mind, this discussion is currently happening. I know a lot of landlords have had questions in the past about whether or not they can restrict their tenants from owning pit bulls, for example. Right now, because the new law has been introduced, and we do not expect the pit bull ban to last. We don't expect it to last. We are not currently enforcing the ban. We have stayed several hearings for a later date to determine first what happens with this new law. So that's what we're telling folks. We're not currently enforcing it, but there still is technically on the books a ban in place. All right. Okay, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Andy Fleck, who is Assistant Law Director and Assistant Prosecutor for the City of Lakewood. He's going to talk about our criminal nuisance process and avoiding nuisance claims. Thanks.
Right, okay. All right, like Kevin said, my name is Andrew Fleck. I'm the Assistant Law Director, Assistant Prosecutor here for the city. One of my duties is to administer the criminal nuisance program. Criminal nuisance as opposed to the building code nuisance. So I don't deal with stairs that are crumbling, paint that needs redone, things of those natures. Just the things that have to do with criminal activity that's happening at certain properties causing police response, fire response, calls from the citizenry. These are the topics that we're going to cover pretty quickly. Why do we have this law? How are you involved in it? A couple examples. I'll highlight most of the things that are there. I've sub-highlighted and read the things that we see pretty commonly, things that happen to a lot of different properties. I'll go through the notification declaration process, how to go through the costs and appeals, how to counteract those things, and then finally, things you can do to avoid getting into this process and getting a note from yours truly. Why do we have this law? I'm not going to read you all the slides. That's one of my biggest pet peeves. But the simple, short answer is quality of life. People who live here in Lakewood want to have a vibrant community. They want to be able to not be disturbed, and the city is on board with that, and we're trying to make that happen for people. They found that repeated calls, repeated nuisances were causing deterioration in the neighborhoods. So in 2008, they enacted the criminal nuisance ordinance. So Chapter 510 of the Lakewood Codified Ordinances, if you want to look it up, has all the definitions, things to go through. You can read the entire code. It's only maybe a page. We'll kind of give you all the information that you need. How are you involved? Similar to the pest control situation, you as the owner are the one that's going to be responsible. The code doesn't give us a way to send any kind of bills to the tenants, so the bills or the notifications of the nuisance property ultimately fall back to you, the owners of the property. The activity that's going on that could cause the nuisance doesn't have to be done by you, the owner of the property. It could be done by someone that you employ to be there, someone that you've rented the place to, someone that you've invited to be there, someone that your tenant has invited to be there, someone who's the occupant or the person in charge of your area. It could also occur within 1,000 feet of your property. However, we do have to, we're using common sense here, folks. We're not tying things to your property that don't have a logical connection. So, for example, if you had a rental property close to the high school and kids had a fight in your front yard, they're not tied to your property. It just happened to be that they were near the high school and having a fight. That's not something that you need to worry about. Here are a few examples. Disorderly conduct. Noise violations is a big one. We have a lot of those. Alcohol violations. False alarms. If you have alarms on your buildings, we have added that. That's new in 2017. So we're in our second year of administrating that. How could you get a letter from us? If there's 2 minor misdemeanor or 1 felony offense within a calendar year, you will get a letter from us notifying you that your property could be declared a nuisance. It'll set forth the incidents that occurred, when they occurred, who was involved, and an estimate, not a bill, but an estimate of what the response was that the city used at that time to abate the nuisance. So if the police and fire trucks came out, how many officers were there, how long were they there, was the squad there, how many firefighters were there, all for durations of time. The notification will come to you as the owner of the property. If you own a commercial property, I don't think that's necessarily what tonight is for, but if you do own a commercial property, I do send the letter not only to you, the property owner, but to whoever the tenant business is, so that they're aware of it, because most of our commercial property problems are false alarms. And if they don't know that the alarm's causing a problem, that we just try to notify as many people as possible to try to solve the problem so that we're moving forward. So 3 false alarms in 6 months or 4 in a calendar year will again get you the notification. Hey, there's a problem here. Here's where it's headed. You know, we'd like you to step in and do something about it. Most people will respond. You can respond with an email. You can respond with a phone call. You can respond with a letter. Personally, I like to have the letter better because I can put it right in the file and we can come back to it. If you call me on the phone, I'll make a note of it, but it's not the same as something that you wrote out that can be included in the file if we ever have to come back and revisit it. If you get through the entire calendar year with no additional nuisance things, then you come out, you're back to square one. So then you'd have to have 2 more occurrences in a year, or 3 in the case of an alarm in the 6 months, or 4 in a year, in order to get back into the nuisance program. If you do get another offense after you've had either the 2 misdemeanors or the 1 felony, then we declare your property a nuisance. So it's a second letter that'll come out to you, and this will actually contain a bill. The bill will be for the actual cost that we spent abating the nuisance. So again, number of policemen, number of firemen, number of building inspectors, their time, what they had to generate, if there were letters, if they used vehicles, all kinds of things go into these bills. If you do get a letter declaring your property a nuisance, you have the right to file in the mayor's office a request for reconsideration. Say, hey, look, here are the steps that I took to try to avoid this nuisance, and my tenant, I couldn't get him evicted fast enough, and they kept doing this activity. I was trying, I was making steps. You can appeal that to the mayor, and if you are ultimately dissatisfied with the mayor's response, then there is a final step appealing it to the Board of Nuisance Abatement Appeals. All this is outlined in the code. It will tell you how to do it, give you the timelines, what you need to do. Yeah. This is what I said, you know, the wage of the city personnel, the use of their vehicles, clerical work, stuff that they had to do for the invoicing. You have to pay it within 30 days. If you don't, then they just assess it onto your taxes. If you do file for the notice for reconsideration or the nuisance appeals board, obviously that time is stayed. You don't have to pay it before, because a lot of times I don't think we'd be able to convene the nuisance board within the 30 days. So if you do the reconsideration, that kind of stops your time. If you go to the Nuisance Board of Appeals and end up losing, then your 30 days is from the date that you lose the hearing to get it paid. We don't expect you to pay it ahead of time and then have to be reimbursed. Here's how you could, if you came before the nuisance board, you can prevail if you no longer owned the property, or if you could show that you had taken sufficient action to rectify the problems. Here's some ways that other people have been able to do that. Show that you've evicted the tenant, show that you're enforcing all the terms of your lease agreement, show that you're complying with the landlord obligations under the code. To date, we've nuisance 335 properties since 2009, but we've only had 6 that have ended up appealing it all the way through to the nuisance board.
Andy, when you say we've nuisanced 335 properties, I think maybe for the benefit of the group, that is, we've warned 335.
We've notified.
Yeah, we've notified 335 properties.
Correct, not necessarily declared 335 properties. Sent an initial notice.
What percentage would you say of that 335 would have actually gotten a bill at some point later? how many actually get to the point where they actually get a bill?
10 to 15%,
Okay.
I would guess. So that would put you about 30 to 45 properties somewhere in there would have been sent a bill, and of those 30 to 45, 6 of them have come to the board. Question?
About how many properties in Lakewood even enter the process. So I don't have a census data. So 300 properties, how many properties are Lakewood?
Bryce, how many properties?
17,000 structures, 30,000 housing units, pretty small percentage.
Yeah, I say so.
But to a neighbor who's being irritated by the behavior, it's important.
Here's what everyone probably wants to hear. Here's how you can avoid getting a letter from yours truly. Screen your tenants. Kevin gave you the link or notified you of how to get to the link to do the background checks. Another way is to search the public court dockets, especially here in Lakewood. There's a robust eviction dockets, and we've seen people that move from one area of the city to another area of the city to a third area. You can check online using their name and see if there's been eviction processes filed against them. You can check surrounding areas. I mean, I don't know, in your initial rental packet, if you have information where they previously lived or where their current address is, you could check that area and see if they're being evicted from there. Respond when you get the initial notification letter to me and say, hey, here's what I'm doing, or call me to get suggestions of what to do. Hey, I'm having this problem, I'm not sure how to go about it. You know, I don't want to send you a letter with a bill attached to it. I will if I have to, but I'd much rather that you took care of the property, rectified the problem, and took those steps on your own. I'm here to help you, so you know, give me a call if you're not sure what to do. Send me an email. Hey, here's my property, here's what's going on. How can I move forward with this? Check on your property periodically. You know, drive past, see what's going on there. You know, I know you can't just stop in, but you know, check on it. Ultimately, you're the one that's going to be responsible for the activities that are going on there. These are some other resources for the landlords. Kevin talked about the best rental practices, the rentals screening, and to the lady's point, rate of 52% non-occupied rental properties here in the city. Do you have any questions for me? I will not be available afterwards, so I'll try to take a few questions now if there are some. The gentleman in the red. Can you
repeat the question?
I strive to, when a nuisance hits my desk, to have some kind of letter or formulation of a plan within 2 weeks. We do rely on the police department to notify us when they're constantly responding to an address. We rely on the fire department to alert us in the law department when they're constantly responding to an address. You bring up a good point that it doesn't require an incident to be considered for nuisance purposes doesn't require an arrest. It just requires any kind of documentation that police were called there. If you want to send me some more information about it, I don't know exactly what property you're talking about, but we could have a further discussion about, you know, why that was taking so long. I'm not sure without knowing the specifics of that case. All the way in the back. You're asking if because the property is nuisance, are you going to get a fast track on the eviction process? No, I can't do that. I mean, the law is for the eviction what it is. If you call and notify me that you're evicting someone, you know, I take that into consideration. So if another incident happens and I know that you're in the process, I don't necessarily just send you the bill right out because I know that you're trying to do what you can and you're bound by the law in terms of the timeline. Up front.
If there's police, fire, or EMS activity at our property, will we be notified? Is there a city process to let the homeowner know?
Repeat the question.
Say police
He's asking, I don't know if everyone can hear, he asked if there's a way for the city to notify him every time the police or the fire or the EMS respond to his address. I'm not aware of any way for them to call. I mean, the police probably go on hundreds of calls a day. We'd be calling everyone all the time. So I'm not, the notice for you is when it's becoming a problem, I send you the letter, and that's kind of where we go from. That's a good idea. I don't know if everyone heard that. She said she periodically will make public records checks at the different areas, the fire or the police department, to see of her address if there's been a lot of activity there.
Hey, Andy?
Yes.
In addition, though, one upgrade that's happening as we speak is we're a significant change and improvement in our police and fire record keeping, and that includes our dispatch calls. And by August, we expect to be able to have a citizen to our police to citizen portal that would share all that call activity more readily than we've ever been able to do. So you would actually be able to do a routine inquiry on your property to see if anything's coming up. But that would be likely in the fourth quarter of this year that would be available.
What's the underlying basis for the ordinance? Is it a health issue? Is it a safety issue? Or is it a police power issue?
It's a neighborhood quality issue.
Right.
Neighborhood quality is not part of your overall jurisdiction. You can't legislate because neighborhood quality. It has to be health, safety, or police power.
Well, and actually, I disagree. The fact of the matter is, in Lakewood, we, because of our population density, we have an opportunity and an obligation to protect peace and tranquility of everybody who resides here. So someone who's disrupting it, it would actually be a police power then, because it's a noise violation, for example.
What did you say it was when you enacted the ordinance?
Well,
I mean, either you know that or you don't.
well, the fact of the matter is, the actual transgressions would be a violation of Lakewood code. But I would say the overriding goal is to protect the quality of a neighborhood experience. That is something that we think about every day here. And those who violate noise, for example, disturbing the peace, that is a code violation.
I've got a neighbor who's both a bigot and insane, who wants to complain about my tenants all the time. I've got no way to protect myself against this widely issued ordinance.
Well, actually, we do, from time to time, have excessive complaints about one issue, and we filter those through. We try and investigate the nature of the complaint, whether it's reasonable or not, and whether it's broad-based or not, and determine whether it's nuisance or whether there's another motivation, similar to what you're talking about. There is a lot of due process. There are judgments made. There are appeals through the process. And for example, in a circumstance similar to yours, where there was a chronic complainer about one particular incident, we were able to effectively talk to the complainer to get a better understanding of what the point was. Our goal is not to penalize landlords or tenants. Our goal is to figure out if there's a disruption in the neighborhood and how we can effectively deal with it. Sometimes we can use the hammer of the law. Sometimes we have to use the subtle experience of just a human persuasion. All that's at play here. So I think every circumstance is different, in my opinion, and I am the one who hears the appeals. My goal is to make the problem go away. I'm not interested in your money, but sometimes it's necessary to collect money to get somebody's attention so they do what they need to do as a landlord, for example. That's rare, though. Most landlords are very earnest in making sure problems are addressed. Sometimes they don't know what to do, and therefore we work with them to try and figure out the best approach to solve the problem. So I would say in your case, I would like to know more how we can effectively deal with that problem. But that's a problem, I would say, that you're experiencing.
And to your point, I mean, simply someone making an allegation about something happening to your property doesn't necessarily consider it a nuisance. So if someone said, there's loud music going on at your apartment complex, and the police get there and there's not, that's an unfounded complaint. So unless it continues to happen, 10, 20 times, and we can tell that someone's turning the music down right before the police get there, or they have a scanner and they're doing that, I mean, we don't, just because the police had to, the police's job is to respond to calls. But I mean, we're trying to affect the things that we can. Just because someone makes a complaint, if the police get there and say, look, there's music, but it's not loud enough, then we don't consider that for the first step your first violation under the nuisance process. Does that make sense? It would be nicer for you, but the person who lives there probably wouldn't like it so much. If that's all, then I'm, yeah.
Is there a list of nuisance properties somewhere online?
No. It's not online. We have an Excel spreadsheet. I suppose that's a public record. Kevin, you have a thought on that?
It's public record.
Yeah.
We're actually maintaining the database of our nuisance property activity within the property management system that we've got employed for all properties for many, many reasons in Lakewood. So for example, through our building department, all permits pulled, everything is tied into that property through that system. So we can produce a report if you'd like one.
So if you would like to see us and make a request, we can get one to you.
Andy, thanks very much. I appreciate it. I will stick around and fall under the withering gaze of these landlords in your absence. Thank you.
If anyone have any questions beyond, they can email me and I'll get back to them.
Okay, very good. Yeah, and Andy Fleck, he's in the law department. You can email law@lakewoodoh.net, and most certainly your questions will be routed to him. In the back row, yes, before we leave this topic?
Do I? We own income properties? I do. Yeah. No, actually. I used to. I used to when I was double on Cook.
Okay. Thank you. That sounds a little bit like a rhetorical question, so we're going to move on. We're going to get to water and sewer rates and EPA compliance, and the mayor is going to present on that. Thank you, Mayor.
Yeah, good evening, landlords. Naturally, we really need for you to be successful. There's 30,000 housing units in Lakewood. 52, 54% of them are rental. It's a big part of the Lakewood experience. And as a consequence, because of your tenants who come in, live here a while, and move on, conventional wisdom is that between Lakewood and the rest of the world is probably 2 degrees of separation. That is somewhere in the world somebody has been to a bar here or lived in a double in Lakewood somewhere along their lifetime, or certainly knew somebody who did and went to a party there. That's sort of a fun part of Lakewood is we do extend out, and it's because of the rental experience. I'm often asked what the most challenging issue facing our city is, and people are always surprised when I tell them our sewer system. It even trumped the challenges of healthcare in Lakewood Hospital. And that's because of federal law, Clean Water Act of 1972. We have a strategy, we call it Clean Water Lakewood, and it's all encompassing. You're going to hear a little bit about it today in the piece that affects you. Now, because we have so many structures, 17,000 structures, every one of those structures is a water collection system. And that water collects, goes into the gutters, and then goes through our sewer system, ultimately gets treated to our watershed. The drama for Lakewood is a 100-year-old system built generally by 1920 with designs that would not be legal today. We're going to hear, I'm going to share a little bit of information. And the maintenance of that system and ultimately the redesign of that system fuels an enormous financial challenge for a city like Lakewood. So we're going to expect to have to levy increased water and sewer rates really for years into the future. This is a projection of likely rate increases of about 10% really for the next 10 years through 2025 and beyond. And we're assuming, by the way, that we have a reasonable relationship with the federal U.S. Department of Justice and the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency and a federal judge who ultimately will be the determinant of our rates. But nevertheless, right now, in order to maintain control and show goodwill, we are expecting to have to make investments, and we do that in small part by the rates that we charge your structure, which you likely pass on, or I know in doubles cases often don't pass on. I know when I owned a double on Cook, I did not pass on the water. It was baked into the rent. So one of the things that's important for you to know is that rate cost is going to increase in the near future. Our rates, however, are generally competitive. We're still in the bottom, really 40% in the region. You see Rocky River at $69 based on a typical 6 CCF per month. Lakewood's at 81. The Northeast Ohio Regional Sewer District, which is 37 different communities, get that rate, is at $89. North Royalton, 95. Parma, 99. They're all facing the same pressures. So while we're raising our rates, we have a weather eye to the regional competitiveness. I just want to show you a glimpse of a couple of issues here. Underneath the street in front of your rental property is a set of pipes that generally look like this. Sometimes there's only one pipe, but if there are two, it's an over-under sewage strategy. Generally because in 1910, when they had to dig these trenches, you know the hard shale that we are bedded on, digging those trenches was very hard. So they dug one trench, and they put the sanitary pipe at the bottom and the storm pipe on top, and they created some overflow invert plates so they could actually take shifting volumes of rain and do so without flooding basements. So likely, this is the root of the problem. If you were to build a city today, you would have two separate pipes, two separate trenches, and never the two would meet. But that's not what Lakewood was built like in 1910, 20, and a little bit in the 30s. So in a normal dry weather day like today, all the water gets collected into the system and gets transferred to the wastewater treatment plant, which you see in the upper right-hand corner. And when it's treated as potable water, it gets discharged into the watershed, in our case, into Lake Erie or Rocky River. The challenge is when we get a big rainstorm. We produce more volume than we can handle. The system starts to fill up, and it's designed to overflow into the lake untreated at that point. If it didn't do that, given the structure, every basement in Lakewood would ultimately be a holding tank. So the conventional goal in 1910, 20, and 30 was waterborne pathogens, public health, cholera, diphtheria, and typhoid. And the goal was to get this dirty water away from the population as fast as they could. And the best way to do that in a city like Lakewood, given that we're on a high plateau and that we had a major watershed that we could send it to, and that in that watershed, Lake Erie, it would become diluted and ineffective. Well, obviously, 100 years later, that dilution wasn't capable enough. We killed disproportionately the quality of water, and we needed to make changes. We've been making them ever since. So I have basically a video that's going to, where's the mouse here? Oh, there we are. It's going to show you what happens in a rainstorm in Lakewood.
I'm going to maximize that.
Many older cities across North America use combined sewer systems, where both sewage and stormwater flow into a single pipe to wastewater treatment plants. But during heavy rainfall events, this mixture of raw sewage, stormwater, and garbage backs up the sewer system, creating a combined sewer overflow, or CSO, allowing untreated polluted sewage and garbage to flow directly into local waterways.
All right, so that's what happens in a nutshell. Actually, let me close this off.
Most of us don't spend a lot of time thinking about the infrastructure beneath our feet. When we wash the dishes, empty the bathtub, or flush our toilets, a lot happens underground, out of sight and out of mind. So what does happen underground? Well, Winnipeg has a...
There we go. All right, I think we're back. So you get the idea that dry weather, we have 10 times the capacity to deal with our everyday volume. And in a wet weather event, a big one, we don't. For example, this past October, we received 0.8 inches of rain in 20 minutes. Perhaps you remember that storm. It was an enormous volume that came at us very suddenly, and our system behaves as designed to direct that untreated water over these dams that are built into our sewer system to overflow into the lake. That's illegal by the Clean Water Act of 1972, and we are earnestly working in a variety of ways to re-engineer the system so that we reduce those overflows and ultimately eliminate them. One of the key elements that's important to you is how water moves off your house as a private property owner. And this applies to rental property owners and non-rental property. The roof is the collector system. You'll see in this picture an example of a house on Atkins, actually, where the blue are the gutter pipes, and there's a lateral that runs out to the street. And then down below, you'll see a green, which is the sanitary pipe. In Lakewood, generally, the sanitary pipe is at the foundation level below, and oftentimes the stormwater pipe is several feet above that, and that's a pretty classic example. And how we manage water that moves off your property it becomes a challenge. Now, this is a busy picture, but it shows the variety of things that go wrong. Things get clogged, pipes actually infiltrate from one to the other. In 1918, when my house was built, the pipes that were, the lateral pipes were clay pipes, and they basically just butted against each other. And ultimately, over time, those pipes separate, ground shifts, creating leak paths, and so that storm pipe that oftentimes is directly above the sanitary pipe has storm water leaking down through the ground, going into the sanitary pipe out to the street. And as we create more volumes in our sanitary pipes, then that sanitary pipe fills up because of all the storm water, overflows into the storm sewer, and that's what overflows into the lake. So we are very challenged to figure out how water moves off your property and what the problems are, and ultimately, when the volumes get to the street, how we move down the street through our collector system, our sewer pipes, which are 160 miles of sewer pipes, by the way, and then ultimately to the treatment facility. There's a variety of strategies at play, increasing capacity of our storage plant, or our treatment plant, which we are doing, storing water, which you see in these bioswales throughout the city. Every commercial development has a responsibility to catch the storm water and try and drive it into the ground. In front of the Giant Eagle gas station, Getco, you'll see that big bioswale in the front corner of just to the west of Bunce. That's actually designed to be a stormwater management system. In front of Madison Park, you'll see bioswales there. In the parking lot of CVS in the middle of the city, you'll see bioswales throughout that parking lot. Behind the Beck Center is a big bioswale that you probably don't see too often, but it's back there. Every commercial development has designed to manage its stormwater differently. Every one of the new schools that we've built actually manages its stormwater. Often under the parking lot, there's a series of pipes that diminish in size that will slow down the volume of water that ultimately goes through the system. The point is, we have a lot of work to do to direct more stormwater, not sanitary water, into the ground, slow down the volumes, defer the volumes, treat the volumes more quickly. All are upon us, and you're going to have a role here. My big concern is that you spend time to secure the quality of your foundation, and at that moment in time when you have everything dug up, you don't properly address your lateral pipes going out to the street. Today, I would hope that every contractor who does work in Lakewood advises you of that, but I want you to be sure that you pay attention to this responsibility. These pipes get clogged. Oftentimes, we saw traps built into these laterals at the sidewalk site. Those traps fill up with dirt and they create a backup. And when they create the backup, then you create this infiltration of storm to sanitary, sanitary to storm. Sometimes the contractor who built your house or mine, when they got to the street and it was an unregulated housing market, didn't care which pipe they hooked into the street. They hooked to the first pipe they came to, and the sanitary pipe might have gone into the storm pipe illegally, or vice versa. At any rate, we create significant pressure on the volumes. So a lot to think about here. I want you to be aware how serious it is, and I want you to take the responsibility of understanding how water moves off your property. Now, in the last 10 years, we've spent about $18 million of water distribution improvements. Those are water mains. And our water mains are also of the same vintage. You'll see these, particularly in cold weather like we have these days. The ground shifts, the pipes are brittle, and you'll create a fissure in a water main, a high pressure, and you'll get these leaks in the street, requiring us to patch it and ultimately replace. We've been pretty systematically replacing water mains. It's probably the most disruptive project we can put on your street. We have to dig it up twice. We have to actually dig it up, put in the new one in, then we have to test it, and then we have to dig it up and then hook all the laterals from the houses to it. Very, very challenging process. If it happens to be your street's term, once in a century, bear with us on that, but it's important. We also have spent about $30 million over the last 10 years on our sewer pipes. But here's what's ahead of us. We estimate, really, we have about $57 million worth of work to upgrade all our water mains over the next several decades, and ultimately, probably $321 million of sewer work that's ahead of us. And that's, if we are really diligent about it, we're working hard to reduce these numbers. But the fact of the matter is, in a second century view of the world, with our obligations to protect our watershed, with a sewer system that was designed to behave in a different acceptable environment. We have a lot of work ahead of us. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on those water and sewer rates, so we want you to understand that. So I think we're ready for an update. I'll be glad to take questions later about my favorite subjects, perhaps yours now, sewers.
We got most of the bad news out of the way. Now we're going to get some good news. Bryce Sylvester, standing in for the mayor, who is our Director of Planning and Development, will give you an update on development around the city for the near term and most recently. Thanks, Bryce.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Mayor. Good evening, everybody. My name is Bryce Sylvester. I'm the Director of Planning and Development here at the city. So tonight I wanted to just spend a little bit of time talking about some exciting things that are happening in and around neighborhoods that you guys know so well as property owners. I'll walk through just a couple projects that are in the pipeline for 2018 and also talk about some projects that are going to be occurring after that as well. So what we like to kick these meetings off with is a tie back to the city's long-range plan. It's called our community vision. And the screen the slide up on the screen identifies 6 focus areas: community wellness, housing, mobility, education and culture, safety, and commercial development. These are our 6 focus areas that our community have told us to focus on. And you'll see these icons pop up across some of the slides that are behind me this evening because they really all are intertwined into the projects that we're working on. So the first one I wanted to talk to you about is an exciting parks project, which is actually due north behind City Hall at Cove Park. Who's familiar with where Cove Park is in the audience? A lot more than I expected. So Cove Park, we spent all of 2015 working with our community to adopt a master plan for this park that re-envisions how this space will be used. So we broke ground just about a month ago, and throughout this year, we'll be making about $750,000 of investment into this park. We'll be adding a walking path around the entire park, laying new ground for a larger ball field so bigger kids can play soccer where they were constrained in the size of the field that was there before. We'll be adding a brand new playground and expanding the community garden space. What we found and heard from our community members is that our park space is near and dear to our neighborhoods, and that investments into our parks, just like the investments at Lakewood Park and the SYSTE steps, a lot of the improvements at Kaufman Park downtown, and also at Madison Park are showing a ton of value to our citizens. And so it's improvements like this that are important to us because we know that it shows value to our community. The second park project that we have our eyes on is Wager Park. At the same time we did our master plan for Cove Park, we also did a master plan for Wager. Wager is a marquee park on the west end of Madison Avenue, and very similar, has not really seen a focused improvement plan ever in this community. And so we spent about a year coming up with this master plan. You'll see improvements that include a new basketball court, a multi-use court, a newer area for a multi-use field. This one also has a brand new playground concept incorporated in it. This project is a little bit further beyond the Cove Park project. We're looking at 2019 as a potential start date, but we wanted to show the community that we were serious about our renovation here. So actually last summer, we did a public art project where we painted a custom mural on the street for the neighbors to enjoy, and it's been a wild success for us up at Wager Park. Next, I wanted to get into some commercial development projects that are happening throughout the community. The first being a project you guys are probably all familiar with, the Cleveland Clinic Family Health Center at the corner of Bell and Detroit is currently under construction and on schedule. This $32 million investment will be open on July 25th of this year. They've been under construction for about a year, and it'll be certainly a welcome addition to our commercial corridor. Here's a photo from actually last fall. If you've been by the site, they've put the entire skin on the building, and they're actually putting drywall up right now, so they're progressing very nicely on site. Right across the street is this beauty. This is Lakewood Center North, as it was before the renovations happened. This building was constructed in the 1960s, and the type of architecture was actually called brutalist architecture. And they nailed it on this one. So we spent about a year with this property owner to re-envision this building's future. And if you drive by, the outside of the building is certainly going through a major exterior renovation, but more importantly is what's happening on the inside. This was a property that was predominantly built as office space and became non-competitive in the marketplace. The space on the interior just was not competing, so we worked with the property owner to re-envision its future. And the exterior renovation is really a representation of how you do adaptive reuse. So there's going to be about 180 market rate apartments in this building when it's complete. The third floor will have outdoor private patio decks. And here's just an image of what some of the interior units look like. They've got about 50 done so far, and they've leased just over 40 of them. So they're performing on their lease rates. They'll continue through phase 2 through this year, and they hope to be done with the entire building by the beginning of next year. Next is a project on the same block. So we had the Family Health Center. I talked to you a little bit about Lakewood Center North, and then on the south side of Detroit at Bell is the former Lakewood Hospital site, where the city spent about a year interviewing developers to land on the best and most qualified developer to take on this site, which is Carnegie Management and Development Corporation. They envision a mixed-use project on this site that includes new office, new retail, new residential, and two components that we're really excited about. At the corner of Bell and Detroit will be what is envisioned as a public plaza for the community to access. And this also envisions the historic renovation of the Curtis Block, which is the 1920s building at the corner of Marlow and Detroit. So that'll be a complete renovation of that building as well. This project is currently, we're going through the term sheet process with the developer, and the construction would likely start on this project some point in 2019. Here's a closer look at the what is envisioned for that public space at the corner of Bell and Detroit. So in addition to some projects happening in our downtown core, right at Bell and Detroit, we're seeing a lot of commercial activity on Madison Avenue. In fact, since 2013, we've seen a great uptick in commercial building permits. Over 300 commercial building permits have been pulled for commercial buildings in the district. Those are not HVAC, electrical, plumbing. This is structural work that's happening in our 100-year-old building stock on Madison, which is really important, not only for our buildings, but for our neighborhoods. So we're continuing to see Madison perform well in the market. This is one building that has gone through extensive renovation. Similar to Lakewood Center North, this was also sort of a brutal building to look at every day as we went down Madison Avenue. And the mayor and I were laughing earlier today. This building probably could have been two uses. One was a storage building, which is what it was built for, and two, a distillery. Those were our only two options. We didn't have anything else to do here. So we walked apartment owners through here, condo owners, people that wanted to do office space. It was a really hard space to repurpose. And we needed Kevin and Ann Thomas to show up and have a creative idea to repurpose it. And if you've driven by, they have started extensive renovations on the building and are actually adding an addition to do a full-scale distillery at this location. They'll have a full-service restaurant inside too, and I expect them to be open later this summer. Here's a look on the inside of the building just about a month ago. And so you'll see some of the distilling tanks that you can actually see from Madison Avenue from the outside of the building. And this is a photo of the addition that's on the east side of the property. In addition to some, what I would call a larger project, we have smaller but very important projects to our commercial corridors. This is a building that's in the Birdtown neighborhood. It was formerly Newbert Painting and was purchased by the owner of Barocco, Juan Vergara, and he's going to be opening up his second business called Casablanca later this summer. So Juan is an interesting guy because he not only invested in his first commercial business on Madison Avenue, he purchased this building 5 blocks away from his other building and is doubling down on the corridor. And so for us, we see that as a really important sign that we've got business owners that are not only succeeding on Madison Avenue, but they're looking for additional opportunity to grow. As we move north down to Detroit on the east end, we have an exciting project going on with the expansion of Virginia Marty. Currently, they are going through a storefront renovation program to re-envision their existing space. They envision some very unique art to be on top of the building, to be sort of a marquee element as you look at this building from West 117th Street. And they've also purchased the former Veta property, which you can't see in this photo, but is right next to that red brick building, where they plan to bring a culinary institute to the east end of Lakewood. Virginia Marty has partnered with the New England Culinary Institute to expand their service offering at this college. So this will happen probably over the next 2 to 5 years, and something that we're really excited about on the city's east end. A few blocks to the west, we get to the Rockport site, which was originally envisioned back in 2005 and took us about 11 years in total to figure out, but is finally getting built out in its final phase, adding 51 townhomes to the city's east end. The price point on these was averaged about $250,000, and they sold out quicker than they thought. So every unit is sold out on site. If you drive by, they are finishing up some of the units, and I expect them to be done by the end of this year. On the city's west end is a similar project. The former McKinley School property has been under construction for the last 2 years by Liberty Development Corporation. They are under construction right now on 40 townhomes at this site, and they are also nearly sold out of all the units on site. The most interesting part about this project was that we explored the option of introducing first floor master suites on this site. So 10 of the units on site actually have first floor masters. When we talk to citizens in our community, that's one of the greatest needs that they talk about, is how you develop in an urban community to introduce first floor master suites. And so we wanted to try to figure it out with new construction, and we were able to be successful on this project. Last but certainly not least is the importance of our housing stock, and that really ties back to everybody that's in this room tonight. We value very much the quality of our housing stock, and it's your investment in these properties and your goodwill in making them the best that you can that really define the success of our neighborhoods. When I talk about economic development, I reference our housing stock all the time because in each of those houses, there's somebody that's going to work every day, and there's a landlord, in a lot of cases, that's making investment in that property that makes a big difference in our communities. So I wanted to end with thanking you for being here tonight and being responsible landlords in our community. Kevin, that's all I got. I will stick around for sure after if anybody has any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Bryce. I'm next going to welcome Alex Harnos, city planner, works in Bryce's Department of Planning and Development, and he will introduce the concepts of resiliency and sustainability to us, something we have not addressed at these landlord seminars before. We thought it'd be, this is going to be a year where we talk about this a lot. And so we'll introduce Alex to give you some background on it. Thanks, Alex. And by the way, you have less than 20 minutes.
I'll do my best. Thanks, Kevin. As Kevin mentioned, this is a topic that we've not addressed in these landlord meetings up until this point, but it's an effort that we're really excited about and that we think will help to continue to differentiate Lakewood from other communities in the region and especially among the inner ring suburbs. We think that these sorts of long-term planning efforts that bear fruit in the parks projects that Bryce discussed and the commercial developments that Bryce discussed in the sewer work that the mayor discussed, really will continue to show value for you and for the investments you've made in these properties for years and years to come. So our focus on resiliency is to address the local effects of large problems: globalization, population growth, climate change. How can we impact these types of things on a local level? These seem like huge problems, and they are. But as the mayor discussed, we're about to make, over the next 10 years or so, over $100 million in public investments. So how we make those investments and how we allocate those funds and the way that we think about them will be very important in addressing shocks and stressors that come towards our community. So what sorts of shocks and stressors does a community face? Certainly environmental shocks. This is a photo from the morning after Hurricane Sandy. Knocked out power, knocked down trees across a lot of Lakewood. In a 100-year-old electric grid, a 100-year-old telephone grid, a 100-year-old water system, event like this is very stressful, and it takes a long time to recover. So as we rebuild these systems, as we reinvest in these systems, how do we do that correctly? Those are one of the things that we're going to be asking our city administration and the task force that I'll introduce to you in a few moments to think about. We also respond to political and social stresses. A lot of what we respond to in City Hall comes from Washington or from Columbus. When funding goes down, when policies change, we have to adapt to that, regardless of our change in values. And so being more self-reliant, planning in a way that gives us greater flexibility is very important. Responding to changing demographics is also very important. When you look at the ages of people within the city, how they're changing, who's moving in, who's moving out. Do you have to invest in schools, in senior services, in young families? Getting ahead of those curves and knowing what you're about to face is very important. Economic shocks and stresses. They don't all have to be negative to be a shock or a stress. Certainly the incredible growth in the housing market over the past couple of years has been as stressful to many of us in this room as the crash in 2008 and 2009 were. Many things are changing in the economy and the policy of our city, and how do we leverage those things for the benefit of all our citizens. So we think that if we're good at this, we'll do three things. We'll profoundly influence the quality of life of our citizens. We'll allow Lakewood to endure, adapt, and thrive no matter what sorts of shocks and stressors we face. And we can positively impact the most vulnerable in our community. I think my favorite example of this is hearkening back to that Hurricane Sandy example, or just any power outage. So if we all experience a power outage, for some of us that means, a night without the TV on. For some folks, their freezer is going to melt, and those groceries would bust their budget for the month. For someone on in-home oxygen, that's a full medical emergency. So it's a stress to everyone, but fixing that electrical grid or investing in those systems benefits everyone, but benefits the most vulnerable the most. So Bryce talked about our community vision focus areas. When we were updating the community vision in 2017 on its 5-year anniversary, we were benchmarking that plan against some of the best city plans, master plans in the nation. And one of the tools we used for benchmarking was a tool called Eco Districts that came out of the West Coast. And what Eco Districts does is take 25 categories and measures the cities that measure themselves with Eco Districts against those 26 categories. Things like culture and identity, like housing, like mobility, like environment, and how they respond to climate and risk. So as you can see, most of these things fit pretty neatly into the vision categories that we already think about every day. Some of them are a little more specific, but there's nothing that's contradictory. There's nothing that we're not already doing. So what we said was, let's look at all of our plans as a whole and compare them to this framework that some of the best cities in the country are using to compare themselves to. This text is rather small. I don't necessarily expect you to be able to read it, but there are some of these categories where we spend a lot of our time and planning effort. Things like active living, where we had a very active task force. Things like economic development that we plan for and think about every day. Same thing with housing. So some of these larger bars are things that we've spent a lot of time thinking about. Some of these very small bars are things like materials. Up until this point, we don't think a whole lot about where we source our materials from or what we build things out of. Food systems, we've sort of left that to other regional partners. Energy, same thing, we've often left it to the utilities. Through this process, we want to take a more holistic look at how local government can affect all of these things and fill in some of these gaps. So what are we doing to this end? The city administration clearly is focused on these things, but we're also forming a citizen-based resiliency task force. It's going to be a 13-member task force. Council's got 7 appointees. The mayor has 6. He's already identified 4 people that he would like to be on this task force. So you'll see this coming through the news in the next couple weeks about who these folks will be. These are big systems thinkers. They're people who are experienced in their field, experienced professionals in a lot of those fields that we discussed. We're going to ask them to continue to analyze our community vision and our master plan, to fill gaps in it, to make meaningful measurements that we can measure ourselves against our progress and against other cities. And they're going to develop strategies and priorities that we can put into place to advance these goals. So real quick, I just want to give you 2 examples of the sorts of things we'd like the task force to address. So in their community vision, under the mobility heading, goal number 3 is to increase the number of miles traveled by means other than a car within the city. How do we do this? A program that we do already is our sidewalk rehab program. Many of you have probably gotten a sidewalk assessment from us. That was probably not a very good day. We recognize that, but we also recognize is that we've repaired over the past 5 years 180 miles of sidewalk. That's enough sidewalk to walk from here past the Pennsylvania border. And that keeps our neighborhoods safe and walkable for everyone. I like to talk about 8 to 80 cities. When I talk about sidewalks, I talk about from a tricycle to a walker. If it's good for someone 5, 6 years old on a tricycle and someone who's 85 going up to the corner store behind their walker, we've done our job. That's a good sidewalk. So something that's already going on and advancing that mobility goal. Expanding the dedicated bike network. Lots of trips in Lakewood are short trips. If those can be made on foot or on bike, that takes cars off the road and keeps capacity for those commuting trips, for those longer trips where they really belong in a car. Something we're not doing, but we could be doing in the future, things like electric car sharing. In the future, not everyone may own a car who drives. Mobility as a service is a buzzword. I could expound on that for 15 minutes, but I'll spare you. Something you may see in the future. And something you may see way in the future, self-driving community circulators. This technology is just coming online. We hear all the time from our residents that they miss the community circulator, and from RTA that they can't afford to put it back. If there was no driver in that driver's seat, it certainly would be easier to do. So maybe in 10 years, something like this coming down the pike. When we talk about big ideas, this isn't coming next year. It's not in the budget for next year, but we're asking people to think about this and anticipate that these sort of things may be possible in the future. So when we talk about how to measure this, the number of miles traveled in a single occupancy gas-powered vehicle, we want that number to go down every year. That's a number that the census already tracks, and so we can measure our progress against that and against other peer cities. Just one more goal where we're talking about goals, preserve the rapid response time of safety forces. There are a lot of things that make demands on our safety forces, and most of them are emergencies. So how can we preserve some of that response time without not responding to emergencies? One thing that impacts that response time are wellness checks to our seniors, to others who may need check-ins from police and fire. So a program to support universal design, accessible housing, first floor living. If we had, say, a rebate program that helped build houses with first floor masters or other incentives for accessible housing, we may be able to reduce those wellness checks. A check-in service rather than physical checks by the police or fire department would also go a long way to advance those goals. A program to keep our seniors engaged and active with the community. We have this volunteer framework with the Help to Others program that runs through the high school, and with the city's support, this framework could be expanded to retirees and seniors to help keep them active and engaged in the community, reduce the need for those wellness checks. So all those sorts of things could help to preserve our response time by addressing non-emergency responses. So overall, there are a lot of folks who have a role here. For you as citizens and for landlords, it's to be engaged and to provide input to this task force and to City Council as you see these things move through city dockets. So overall, we're looking at our community vision goals and how they can all be tied together under this umbrella of resiliency. So I thank you for the opportunity to bring that big idea forward. And again, this is all something that we're doing to advance our standing as a city and to protect your investment and make this a great place to live for your tenants and for yourself who are citizens. So I thank you again.
Alex, thanks very much. I think Bryce and the mayor's and Bryce's and Alex's presentations tonight just underscore that you've got a city administration that is attempting to be as thoughtful in its planning as possible. And that is not only on behalf of the landlords in our community, but also the other 52,000 residents that we represent. We are at the conclusion of our formal presentations, and so I'd be very happy if any of you wanted to stick around for some Q&A. Those of you who don't, you're welcome to leave now. Thanks, regardless, to all of you for attending. We very, very much appreciate your attendance tonight. Thanks a lot, and your good questions. Just a moment. Just a moment.
Still thinking about it, right?
I'm sorry? No, we're gonna take questions. Just very quickly, if you could. I don't want to keep everyone waiting. We're going to take questions from the audience, folks. That's probably the most efficient way we can do this. Thanks very much. All right, I'm going to start. And so this gentleman is first in the sweater, yes. The question was, and it was initially directed at the mayor, the question was whether or not the city is inclined to award property owners any discounts on water and sewer rates based on whether or not they are taking measures or taking steps to control stormwater on their own properties and keeping that stormwater out of the sanitary or the combined system. And the answer is yes, that is a consideration we're making. We don't have a stormwater management program yet fully in place that would, the sewer district, for example, does have a regional stormwater management program where you can get credit for removing stormwater out of the system, the underground pipe system. We don't yet have that in place, but I can tell you that we are, again, thoughtfully planning our future in this area, and we may indeed develop those kinds of credits in the future based on property-specific changes that owners are making.
And Kevin, could I just add some substance to that? In the regional sewer district, who is ahead of us, and by the way, they are under a $3 billion federal consent decree. We are under administrative orders from the US EPA. They have a federal judge who's mandated $3 billion worth of investments in 37 communities. We're working hard to stay out of that umbrella. We're not likely to stay out of it forever. But what we can benchmark what they're doing. They actually have a fixed component of their fees. We just have a volume-related charge right now. For every gallon of water that you buy, you are assessed a cost, and we assume that same gallon's going down your sewer, so that's also charged. Likely to be, in addition, will be a fixed component, a monthly fee. That will give us the ability to actually rebate that fee if you, in fact, make investments that significantly change the behavior of water on your property. Right now, we can't do that because of the volume-based approach, but if we put the fixed component, we likely can. Other cities have pioneered that, so it's not necessarily new thinking, it would be to us. But that's an example of the kind of thinking we're going to have to explore and ultimately implement here.
Yes.
Go along with that a little bit. Why not also with the rain barrels, do you have these designs already that, whether the water district's doing this or other cities have done it, where you can use it as detention areas, you know, during those times, but then also have it connected up and with like a design, for instance, there's small front yards for beautification, but also utilizing it and running it out of the rain barrel and use that as actually like your little mini bioswale.
So is the question whether or not the city has developed sort of design guidelines around using rain barrels in Lakewood? Oh, yeah.
Actual per site, you know, system, and then that way it kind of helps to minimize the percentage of what actually goes into this overall.
And
Yeah,
that is
that's
in our
cool.
future.
Yeah.
That is in our future, where frankly, if you disconnect your gutters, that's an important event. That means you're directing all that roof water into the ground. That's a huge, huge advantage to our collection system. Other elements of how we manage that water on the ground are going to be important. In fact, we'll also be formulating another task force. We've had one 2 years ago. We're going to bring that band back together to think about how we can, what you would call green infrastructure is what you're talking about, and bake that at the household level. And that's going to be very important to our success. So we don't have any firm plans at this point on how to do all these things, how to measure it, and how to reward you for doing it, but we're very challenged to accelerate our path down towards that. That's right. We have a lot to learn, but that is our future. That is our future. So I appreciate your interest in it.
The Soil and Water Conservation District has a lot of that information already that is especially useful if you're in other NEORSD communities, but they have it for anyone in the county. So if you're interested in it now, definitely look into their programs. Oh, for sure.
Thanks. I know we've welcomed the Soil and Water Conservation District into Lakewood for those trainings, but that's a nice suggestion. Yes, sir.
Yes, John Christie. You mentioned about the increase of rates, sewers, and that's understandable because for all this that you're promising, that you're trying to accomplish, you're going to need money. For landlords, so like myself and maybe others, who pay for the water at this time for anywhere from 4 to maybe 10, 15 tenants. If they're residential, it's very minimum, but if there's business that are operating in the same water, obviously creates an expense that it will be a burden to the landlords. Is there some way possible, maybe already exists, where meters can be bought at the expense of the landlords? So this can be divided, but if the city purchases them somehow or makes them available to us, will be less price than buying them from just down the street, whatever. And this way, they can be separated, the units, and accordingly to the charges that the landlord gets on the one bill, they can divide that
Sure.
cost to the.
Did everyone hear the question? The question was whether the city can offer a bulk purchasing rate for meters, private meters within your property so that you can divide water flow by tenant. And the example was between a commercial tenant and a residential tenant, for example. I don't, Mayor, we don't have such a program right now.
We don't, but it's a good idea. And we actually have similar programs. For example, you could buy a tree, which is a good stormwater management tool in itself, by the way, at the city's cost. So we have some examples how we can use our purchasing power to lower the cost to do something that you would make sense for you to do. That's a great example, and I would say historically our water and sewer rates were modest and you could absorb them. Our message tonight is that's going to be changing, and we're here to hear from you and also to share this information so we can be better and more effective. Right. So,
thank you, everybody, gentlemen. You did a good job.
Thank you. Thanks for being here. Yes. Sure. Right. Yeah, I appreciate the suggestion. It's a very good suggestion. Yes. Might be an opportunity now for us to highlight some of the businesses that are here that have brought many employees with them. Sure. I mean, the way that Lakewood was built in an era, of course, I'm not as much of an expert on this as the people to my right, but Lakewood was built in an era when those storefronts were the economic engine of the city, and it's hard to ignore that now in our planning. But we do have space that's been filled by landlords, by tenants with and owners with lots of employees. Why don't we just give a couple of examples, Bryce?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, not to jump your question, Kev, but two examples that come to mind would be Onyx Networking, which is on the city's west end. It's actually in the Bonnie Bell. Yeah, that's right. So I would classify them. They're a top 10 employer for us. They're a large company in our city. The other that is quietly employing about 500 people is the former Lake Erie Screw Factory. That property doesn't have one employer anymore. It has dozens of employers, but collectively that site brings in about 500 jobs. Our community is absolutely defined by the small business owner. It really always has been. But I would say the hospital project that I talked about earlier offers up an opportunity for Lakewood to compete for that style of tenant, where I don't think we were competing in the last maybe decade for that tenant.
One additional example worthy of mention is Roundstone Insurance. How many employees do we think about?
50 employees.
About 50 employees went into the former Christian Science Church across the street from Lakewood Public Library, which didn't have nearly that many employees when it was around. So that's a terrific reuse of that particular property. The interior was renovated; it's beautiful, and they've got a thriving practice in that building now. So. All right. No,
I would say the one element about the property tax, they have gone up. The good news is we have $300 million of new schools to show for. That's a pretty big deal for the second century of Lakewood. That's behind us. Now, we have to pay for that. It's going to take 30 years to pay that $300 million. But that's a huge investment in the future of this community, and it is the burden of the property owner. But the good news is you have something to show for it that actually is a magnet for folks who want to be here. That's helpful. But it's a challenge. And disproportionately, 62% of your property tax is funding the schools. That's the key driver to the growth of that number. The income tax rate, 1.5%, hasn't changed since Reagan's first term, 1982. We're working hard to maintain that competitive element for your tenants. And right now, out of 57 communities in the county, there's 8 that have 1.5% or less, and we're one of them. So we're at the very bottom of the income tax rate. So that's an element of competitiveness. It's hard to keep an eye on, but it's a factor for us. The idea of diversifying the burden of all these investments to commercial residents is a daily challenge for folks like Bryce. We're having some success there, but it's not a headquarters operation that's going to move here. When you're a built-up community and have been so since 1939, we don't have the big green space that Highland would like. You know, where they can build their own headquarters on green space. Wish we did, but that's our challenge. We have to undo churches to redo. That's expensive. That's how hard it is. But I appreciate the sentiment.
Yes.
I have a rental property on Fry Avenue where all the new Rockford homes. Thank you all. Much better than the parking lots that were there. I did have a question about the street parking. If there's going to be an evaluation, of course, with all those new residents there, they're going to want to park. And I believe there are garages and stuff there, but along right at the top of Fry, there needs to be a sign like no parking from here to corner. Because I'm always running into traffic jams trying to get on and off the Fry.
Are you experiencing that for the first time since these units have been built?
Yes. Now, is that something that you can help me with, or do I need to talk to somebody else about that, or?
We're very good at directing you to other people at City Hall.
Actually, Bryce can handle that.
Probably Bryce.
I'll meet
Bryce
you
can
after.
handle that.
I'll meet you after. We can talk about that. Thanks for letting us know.
Yes, and then Sir in the Hat, we'll get to you next.
What's the city's plan and strategy for managing the growing short-term rental community, like Airbnb and VRBO?
That's a great question. Actually, we think there's about 70 units, but we really don't know. Those are the ones we're able to benchmark. That is likely to grow. The Lakewood actually is an attractive environment for the kind of product they sell. We don't have any management oversight there. Some cities have levied a tax in order to regulate and make sure they're safe, first of all. That's probably our biggest concern from a fire dimension. We're beginning to study how we might go about doing that, but we don't have clear plans, to be honest with you. We recognize that as a trend. And I would say if you have an insight into that, I would welcome hearing more about it.
I would also just say, and this, I'm going to sound like a bureaucrat when I say this, but you're here for a reason. You, number one, and we appreciate this, you're here to hear from the city, and we're here to hear from you. But you're also here because we've got a program in place where if you want to rent your property to someone, you need to get a housing license. And one of the requirements to get a housing license is to come to a landlord training seminar. That is the same for any rental property, residential rental property in Lakewood. And so an Airbnb unit, so long as the owner is not also occupying that unit, is subject to our landlord registration requirements. They probably don't know that. Or maybe they do. Maybe there are some Airbnb folks in the audience. But more than likely, the folks who show up here are the folks who enter into year-long leases or on month-to-month leases with their tenants. So all I can say is that we do have a code that does exist that regulates this. It's not written specifically. It's written for you. It's not written for your average overnight Airbnb guest and landlord. So that's why we're still exploring. Yes?
What are we doing about the streets? Is there something that's going on? I mean, our streets now, we used to always, fill all the cracks with tar and stuff, and it don't seem like we're doing that, preserve them a little bit longer. We used to get a lot more use of them. It seems like we're tearing them up a little bit more than normal. And that's major across all of it.
We have 92 miles of roads in Lakewood. We made a concerted effort. We rank our roads by condition every 3 years. This year is up for a new ranking. And then the worst streets get the highest priority in terms of maintenance and repair. We repair about 1.5 million, or resurface about $1.5 million a year. The next year, this year and next year, 2018 and 19, that means half of Lake Avenue from Bell to 117th We'll spend $1.5 million on just Lake alone, and 2019 will be from Bell to Webb, other way. And that's going to also require a water main replacement. We have about 6 streets that will also get a water main replacement this year and a resurfacing. Our goal is to get every street to a decent, a green level. Orange is bad on our ranking when we plot this out. We've made good headway there. Winters like this one are challenging because not so much the amount of snow, but the frequency of it has been a challenge for us. We tear up our streets when we run plows over them. That hasn't changed in 100 years, and not likely to change. We've made progress on our street quality. I think it's a never-ending goal. What street do you think of when you, is there a street in particular that?
No, I'm just saying, regular maintenance on tarring cracks before winter and stuff, it'd be a
Yeah.
money saver in the long run.
We do.
We're doing that much. I mean, all the
Yeah, well, we do have our own tar kettles, and we do crack filling. We've also outsourced it to get more. I would say whether we're doing it as readily as we would probably like to do, the answer is no. We haven't ignored it. Are we ahead of it? We're not. It's a big challenge for us. It's a big challenge. Well, it's if you were able to get to all of them, yeah. Well, I understand your point, but
You know, there's sometimes also, we do pavement condition rating reports, and so what, we may not direct attention to a street that we know underneath, under the asphalt, at its base is failing, that we're going to ultimately repave anyway, so, and soon. And we rank those streets on that report in order to determine what our priorities are from year to year. I don't say anything that the mayor, of course, doesn't already have to speak about often, I'm sure. But you know, that may be one reason why a particular street doesn't get the attention that you think it might deserve.
Look at West 140. We just repaved that, I don't know how many years ago, but it didn't look like they tarred that at all this year before winter.
Hmm.
That's, you know, that's flying and all that's just gonna tear that street up. You know, we lose 1-2 years off that street, and then it's just done. Major expense.
Okay, thanks. Questions? Yes.
correct. Yeah. From Bell to Western 17, there'll be a little bit of sewer work near the Lakewood Park section to deal with some of the runoff questions that we've identified here, but not a water main replacement on that section. So that's 2018. Your section is going to be addressed. Next year, from Bell to Webb heading west, water main replacement and street reconstruction and some sewer work. That's a huge, huge job unto itself. That's going to be a much more dramatic experience. And the big drama, and I'm really worried, I would love to get some advice from you, is where do we have our 4th of July parade next year? Because it will be right on a construction site. So we'll have to work that through. Generally speaking, during the day, no, but at night, similar to what we did on Madison, you could park on Madison after 5 p.m., but you had to be gone by 7 a.m. So we can accommodate overnight parking on a construction zone, but there's no sense of humor to a car that doesn't pay attention to that. So we can work the best we can. Parking is going to be a challenge. We'll have to work through that, but it won't be easy.
Any questions? All right, we're adjourned. Thanks very much for being here. Appreciate it. And just a reminder, if they're still out there and you want to grab a landlord manual, best practices manual should be on the table. Thanks.